And once has been lost the ability to grow and the ability to dissolve one's illusory construct into the impersonal self again in a conscious way, while awake, not while in deep sleep. Because if you do it in deep sleep, then as soon as the organism wakes up, it will find itself back in the same construct and nothing changes. But if you do it while awake, consciously, dissolve the ego, you literally can be liberated from the past, from the whole criminal record you may be carrying about all the sins you committed or the anger about the sins committed against you. And the whole point of religions is simply that, to dissolve in that impersonal self. Although it got personalized in the form of God the Father or the Goddess or some other form. And then once you believe that that ultimate reality is a person, then it's very difficult to get out of thinking you are a person. Which is why it's extremely important to understand scientifically, not simply mythologically, and not in the imaginary register of consciousness, which is that register in which you believe you are who you think you are. It's only when there is a recognition that none of the ego's beliefs have any reality whatsoever. The ego is literally insane, literally psychotic, because it believes in a complete unreality that's artificial, that's based on particular insanities of the family system and the social system and the religious system one's been brought up in, and all of the various other systemic insanities that one has been indoctrinated into believing through the various media that one becomes addicted to ingesting. And that disinformation then creates further incoherence within the ecosystem. But the simple solution is the absolution, the dissolution into the absolute, the impersonal field out of which your ego arose, into which it returns every night in deep sleep, but which you can live in while awake. And if you choose to live in the impersonal while awake, you can precipitate out a personal consciousness that can respond accurately in real time to everything, but isn't carrying any baggage, because it knows it's not real. And therefore it is absolved of all moral failings and has no interest in committing any moral failings, because it doesn't feel any lack, because it never loses its connection to the impersonal source of being. And so this was the original meaning of Shiva. It was Shivam, that point that emerges out of the field without losing its realization that it is still the field. The field can speak when the field is conscious of itself. But as soon as it loses consciousness of itself, that unconsciousness, the forgetfulness that's called the dwarf in that picture, when you forget that you're that impersonal field and think you're just that drop of consciousness that's operating the body with the history of all of its failures, then there is misery, there is neurosis or psychosis in a very literal sense, and an inability to escape the constant fury of the mind, the constant emission of thoughts over which one has no control, but which determines one's destiny. And the ego has no free will to change its thought patterns or to disidentify from them, and thus becomes a robotic artifact of artificial intelligence. but an artificial lack of intelligence, because it has lost touch with the real intelligence out of which it has emerged. Because originally it emerged at the will of the parents, who conjured up the original identity through their fantasies of who you would be for them. And so until we're willing to let go of the desire to be for them who they wanted us to be, and that we could never fulfill because they wanted us to be the rescuers of their own moral failings and lack of love and lack of intelligence and lack of knowledge of who they really were. And so the history, the ancestry, the relationship to the family system that goes back generation upon generation functions like a curse, because it functions as a demand that you continue the same neurotic ideas and ideals and conceptualizations of what life is about, when none of that has any reality, nor can respond accurately then to the events and challenges that one faces. And one's ability then to call upon one's natural intelligence and one's natural capacity for creativity, for feeling, for love, for compassion, and to call in the wisdom of that infinite cosmic field of intelligence out of which the individuals are born. Once we are reconnected to that source, then life changes. And the individual life then becomes an expression of cosmic life, of cosmic intelligence. And that cosmic intelligence is completely indifferent to the concerns of the ego. It's indifferent to the life or death of the body or the condition of the body. And it's not influenced by the advertising and by the demands of the social system that you look a certain way and talk a certain way and buy certain products and have certain kinds of experiences and think certain things are cool and others are not. And the whole value system that one is trapped in and that one usually takes for granted as some reality has become more and more psychotic, narcissistic, psychopathic. And so we have been trained to have egos that will produce ever more bad karma without the intelligence of getting out of the labyrinth in which we have found ourselves placed in this social experiment in which we are the rats in the cage. And only if you get out of that cage through realizing you have caged yourself through the self-identification with the body, but that you have inherently the freedom to dissolve that rat ego and to return to the true self in the ratri, the night of pure consciousness that is beyond the light of the sun, beyond time and space, to find that inner light of the real self that is never born and that never separates from the infinite, absolute potentiality. To find that is to be reborn, to be resurrected, to be redeemed, to be saved from one's own hell realm, that is one's own mind, one's ego's mind. And it's only by disowning that mind, through realizing it was imposed upon you, but is not you, that gives you the right and the authority and the power to dissolve the ego with all of its hellish attributes and ways of dysfunctioning, and arise again out of the infinite as a being of purity, of truth, of wisdom, of love, of clarity and coherence, who can live a life of nobility and a life of intelligence and a life of compassion, and bring about a change, a liberation of the entire world from its enslavement to the artificial lack of intelligence of the human ego, and can dream the power to emerge a new world out of the planetary noosphere and bring to birth a world filled with beings who have that clarity of who we really are, and thus treat each other with love, with respect, with honoring, with joy, and with giving each other the gift of freedom in the recognition that freedom and infinite presence is our true nature.